Welcome back to What's the Big Book Actually Saying? Step 4, Resentments Inventory. And there's step 4. We looked at it in our introduction to step 4 video. Just to recap, we're going to be pragmatic. We're going to fact find, fact face, walk in with the attitude of a retail stock taker and just look at what we're asked to look at in the process. But what is the process required of us when we do a resentment inventory as part of our step 4? Well, let's look at what the big book says once we hit that section. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what defeated us. In other words, what we have already accepted as part of taking step 3, we've considered its common manifestations. Let's make that a bit simpler. I don't know about you, but I don't walk around using the word manifested twice in the same sentence. Being convinced that self, as it comes up in us in various ways, was what defeated us. And again, what we have already therefore accepted as part of step 3, we considered its common types of self, which again we looked at through the examples and the analogy of the self-centered actor trying to control the show. So we've kind of looked at self to a great degree, but through the lens of examples, not emotions. Now we look at emotions, and we also look at our own previous self up until today, right now, when we've got the pen in our hand and we've got the blank sheet of paper in front of us. Where have we been? Resentful is where our journey begins. Resentment is the number one offender, okay, of what? Of self. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. Second disease is now being introduced, for we have not only been mentally and physically ill. Now, we've learned all about that in More About Alcoholism. There is a solution, the doctor's opinion, the disease of alcoholism, which only has 2 sides, so the big book suggests. We had been spiritually sick. Now, we've already accepted this at step 3. In fact, even when we were considering taking step 3, at step 2, we read a whole chapter called We Agnostics. Alcoholics being also spiritually sick is technically new information. We haven't been described that way before up until now, but really it's just furthering what we cover at step 3. We looked at selfishness, self-centeredness, the actor running the show, blah, blah, blah. Even the bedevilments in We Agnostics, the very famous bedevilments, reveal traits of this second spiritual malady, which we learn at step 3 affects a lot more people than alcoholics. And so we've got to be clear. If we're looking at what the big book is actually saying, it's not saying that the spiritual malady is part of our alcoholism. It's saying quite the opposite. We're tapping into the 12 steps, which largely speaking, we got from the Oxford group, and they weren't alcoholics. And the Oxford group got them from somewhere else in history, and perhaps those people weren't alcoholics. We're looking at finding God through a process, not necessarily or technically getting sober through it per se. So this spiritual sickness, as we learned at step 3, affects almost everybody. So it's really important that we see this at step 4 the right way. I'm mentally and I'm physically ill with alcoholism, a very specific disease, and I'm looking for a spiritual solution, which means I have to look at the spiritual malady, which anyone looking for God needs to examine. And that's where we are. Okay, so let's look at the steps. Let's go straight into the process, because dealing with resentments is a process. We know in AA, most of us draw up columns in an exercise book or a piece of paper. Probably some people, I've had sponsees use an Excel spreadsheet or so forth. You can probably Gantt chart it, I don't know. So we start with who or what. In dealing with resentments, and I'm adding the who or what in the brackets there. This is straight out of the big book. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. Not angry, but now remember, this whole big book is written by the founders describing what they did to get sober. So it's all in the past tense. But we don't know whether each and every one of them went all the way back to the time they were 3. But there's more information about that we'll get to. But what they're telling us is what they did in order to achieve the example, the life that we want as well. Anyway, there's a little bit beyond the table in the big book on the next page. That's page 64. We go to 65. We went back through our lives. Nothing counted by thoroughness and honesty. So what we learned there is that we had to go through our lives and just look at the stuff that ticks us off, that makes us angry. Okay, so, we get some good information here. That's the who or what. We just write stuff down, and then we ask why. We asked ourselves why we were angry. And that's, I've found, quite a fun and almost liberating thing to do. And the table in the big book, which I'm about to show you, reveals why that is quite an interesting, almost fun process. Anyway, how, which is the instincts. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sexual relations that had been interfered with? So once again, in the space of just a couple of sentences, we're given a process that we can use for the rest of our lives in order to become spiritually fit. Now, we were usually as definite as this example. So that's the last sentence there on page 65 before we see the example. And here is the example. Now, in my experience, and you might have more experience than me in terms of taking people through a step 4, but in my experience, sponsoring people, sometimes they don't do as instructed by this example. And I might add, it's one of the few examples, other than prayers, that we can repeat in the big book at all. And it's quite a revealing example, not just on what types of people we need to inventory and which instincts are triggered by what situations. It also goes into the engineering of the process and just how much we need to write and what the tone of that can be. So let's look at that next. Let's look at the first column, the people, places and institutions. Here are mine. This is just an example. I mean, I whack telcos up there, social media platforms, YouTube alone, just for the ads. Family football club, like I always say to sponsees who are getting going, and they'll show me their step 4, or maybe they'll show it before they're finished, and I'll go, "Where's your football club? Where's your coach?" And they go, "What do you mean? Isn't this just about the people in my life?" No. It's about any people, place, or institution that ticks you off. Are you saying that you've never been annoyed at oh no, I'm furious at my club. The way we've drafted the last 3 seasons means we're not going to win a grand final for the next 10 years. Right, put that down. And at times we need to get our anger triggered to remember that should be on our resentments list. And I always say that, we can't physically travel back in time, but boy, oh boy, can't we emotionally travel back in time? All I need to do is remember what that person did to me 35 years ago, and I'm starting to feel what I felt then. And that's the good thing about this process. By just triggering these past events, we can actually really still, decades later, determine what kind of feelings we're having, Is it anger? Am I just peeved? Is it a full-on resentment? Am I furious? Like what level? Imagine my resentment was dialed from 1 through to 10. I can start to really focus on what I felt at the time because it can come back. That's my experience anyway. And I think it's how this process works. You can see the second or third sequel in most movie franchises is there. Clients, childhood, bullies, global corporations, government, supermarkets, parents. Most of my friends have made the list, even though I love them dearly. I could go on. Let's capture the lot, not just the immediate stuff and the stuff that's, is probably what we go to a therapist to talk about. We need to cover a lot more than that. All right, then we get to the causes. Less than 20 words per entry. Now, I don't know about you. I've seen hundreds of words per entry, and it's interesting. It starts to become a lot more than just what we're looking at here, which is a sole focus on what that person, place, or institution did or said. Remember where we started with step 4, fact finding, fact facing. But what's interesting about the facts is they're often judgy or opinion stated as fact. And I think that is the truest, most most honest way to write the second column in a resentments inventory. You look at the examples here. Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. It reads like a really good sitcom character. And half of season one. In terms of story, what we're looking at is the fact of what I felt and perceived and thought at the time. And it travels. Look at the employer. Unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fine me for drinking and padding my expense account. It's like, I'm missing the fact that I probably shouldn't have padded it. We're allowed to be judgy in 20 words or less. And that is the most factual way to record the cause, to actually almost verbatim write down today what our self-talk and our self-perceptions were when we felt these things. And with the employer, you can see it's still a current resentment. Mr. Brown, it almost sounds like a past resentment, even though it's still current. But, he told my wife of my mistress. That's something he did in the past. But the other two elements, his attention to my wife. Brown might get my job at the office. That's present stuff. So, the past and present become a blur. And I think that's why we have to go all the way back throughout our life, because the past and present with unresolved resentments, they're all present really, aren't they? Because they're unresolved. Anyway, what fun it is to write a second column as suggested by the big book itself. Anyway, then we get to the instincts. Which are interfered with. So which are interfered with is the language used in the big book. So we get 5 to choose from. Security could be feeling unsafe in a number of ways. It's interesting. The pocketbook is also mentioned in this section. So financial insecurity is mentioned. Emotional insecurity could be a part of it. I don't know. That's even physical insecurity. If security is an instinct that's triggered, I guess we get to put it down. And you'll also notice that we have to record where fear is involved. And through the 5 instincts that we're given, it seems that self-esteem is number 1, and security also gets mentioned with the wife example. You'll also notice that with the wife example, pride. So what we would call a defect of character or a flaw or a shortcoming is mentioned at this stage. And what we're, I guess, being given permission to do with this example is to chuck in, here it's a single shortcoming or defect of character, whichever you want to describe it as, because it's jumping out at us. So apparently that's okay. So, this is all monkey bars to some extent, isn't it? And that little addition of the word pride proves that. It's our job to do it precisely as they did. But sometimes the precision has a little bit more openness to it than perhaps we can see. Anyway, let's keep moving on to what we do once we've got these 3 columns severely populated, to conclude that others are wrong, because now we're looking at all this stuff they did to us. And you can sense in the previous example, I won't go back, but this person doing the inventory is still quite angry at the wife, still quite angry at Jones, still quite angry at the employer. We haven't shifted the anger yet. Now we're moving into the shifting the anger bit, which doesn't really happen until the 4th step in the process. To conclude that others were wrong was often as far as most of us got. So that's as far as we've got with the first 3 columns, by the way. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. So here the guilt and shame are mentioned. Not helpful emotions to a recovering alcoholic. Certainly that's been my experience. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. This is starting to, this sounds like I've already read this earlier. For when harbouring such feelings, resentments, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. In other words, just another term for a higher power. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. Okay, so one of the things that Bill does in the big book and the other writers is that they hark back to things we've already read and possibly accepted. And here it's the doctor's opinion. This goes all the way back to Roman numerals. We get restless, irritable, discontented unless we can again experience the ease and comfort that comes with taking a few drinks. That's the mental obsession, and the insanity. So in this small couple of references, we're starting to see the cycle of addiction. We haven't really, there are people who go after step one, we don't mention alcohol again. We certainly mention alcoholism all the time because alcoholism includes restlessness, irritability, and discontentedness, and they are all forms of what? Resentments. And here we're being told in no uncertain terms, unless we shift resentment, we do not escape self. We will start to feel like a drink again. The obsession will kick in if it's bad enough, and we bust. Okay. Nice reminder on page 66 of what we've read up to and including page 66, and I might add, admitted. All right, so here we go. The fourth step in the in the first inventory, is we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we say to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him or her or them? I'm sorry, I didn't change that. God, save me from being angry, thy will be done. In other words, the fourth step in the resentments inventory is to start to shift the resentment because, as we just read, most of us never got beyond being resentful. Now we start to fix the problem, shift the resentment, and it starts by changing our perception of that other person, other place, other institution. We pray. And technically, it's the first prayer we're being asked to use beyond the third step prayer, which is where our commitment to seeking God began, I guess. Anyway, the fifth step in the process, so says the big book, is returning to our list again. I like that, it's an interesting sentence structure. Returning to our list again, full stop. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Now, it's an open question that begins with the word where. So we must probably respect that with an open response. And so this fifth column, you'll often see people writing down even more than 20 words, which is where our second column seems to be. That's if you look at all the examples, as I've said this before a few minutes ago, the second column doesn't exceed 20 words, but there's no suggestion or even example. There's no table for this part of our inventory, so we can probably go into more detail if that's what we wish. I also believe that beyond where, perhaps when and how are also very important questions if we're being fearless and thorough. In terms of how had I been selfish, dishonest, and self-seeking or frightened? When had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking or frightened? They seem to work as well as where. That's personal opinion, by the way, because only where is mentioned in the big book. Then there's the sixth step in the resentments inventory, because we've written down the when, where, and how, or whatever of our side of the fence, using trigger words like selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. But then we're asked to keep examining. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. Now, some people believe that's just an extrapolation of the fifth point. I think, and I guess if you look at some people's inventory processes, it's equally true that we could interpret that as, okay, where had I been selfish when it came to my relationship with my brother? Well, I talk over the top of him a lot. That's where I'm really being selfish. I'm not letting him finish sentences, and I'm not listening to understand. I'm listening to respond, to win arguments, make arguments. Great, that's what I've got. That's where I'd been wrong. But what faults create that action in me? And, Joe and Charlie, they have a wonderful checklist with 20 faults that we can literally tick a box or circle or underline. And so I think these individual words that they use to determine what our faults are seems to be the next step beyond this open-ended response, which is what step 5 is. Now, let's just talk for a moment about the language around wrongs, mistakes, faults. I know some people like to make distinctions between, well, what's a defect of character and what's a shortcoming. We know from reading what Bill wrote about the way he wrote the Big Book, and as we know, he was the main author of it, with lots of input from the founding members. We know that all these words are interchangeable. And here are just some that the Big Book and the 12 and 12 use: shortcomings, sins, faults, wrongs, defects of character, misgivings, mistakes, flaws. My suggestion is pick one. I don't want to call them defects of character. Neither do I. I really don't like that term. To me, that's more about faults that produce a product recall in a car. But you know what? I respond very, very positively to the idea of mistakes or misgivings or shortcomings. That is a way or a doorway that I can walk through into the sunlight of the Spirit in regards to being open and honest about myself and where I'm not perfect. And why is that important? Well, it's about where the inventory ends up for resentments. There's a 7th step, a single sentence, but boy, oh boy, what a throwdown. We admitted our wrongs at this stage to ourselves, and if God's listening, to God too, I suppose, and were willing to set matters straight. Now, that is in the Big Book at the end of the resentments inventory process, just before we go into fears. We're willing to set matters straight. This suggests that, and I apologise for that spelling mistake, that we're willing to carry out steps 8 and 9 even before step 5. After all, we're barely past step 3, where we were willing to go to any length to get sober. So I guess that's what it's all about. If we're willing to go to any length to get sober and we've just looked at all our resentments, why wouldn't we be willing to set matters straight? And as we read later on at step 8, not right away, or if it's going to harm that person, not at all, but it's all about willingness, right? And this is where even the inventory process at step 4, before we actually start to admit this stuff and share this stuff with our sponsor or whomever at step 5, we're already developing willingness. Very interesting. So to summarise, still feeling bad about that spelling mistake, but hey. Number 1, who? Who are the people, places, and institutions? 2, why? Short, definite reason, judgy is okay. How? Tick a box. Just tick the instincts. Obviously, reflect first. The key is to reflect, not just tick. But, we have instincts which are relevant. 4, the sick person prayer. 5, where, or in my view, when or how, had I shown my faults? 6, what? What were these faults, flaws? Exactly. Can I name them? Joe and Charlie, 20 character defects, very helpful. Next, we admitted our wrongs and we're willing to set these matters straight. So I'm just going to let you take that in for a moment. That's the process. Simple and clear. And I might add, it was suggested to me early on that I should go down each of the columns in order, but I think that's okay for who and why. Straight down with who, straight down in why. But I do think once you hit the 3rd column, the instincts, you need to start going across line by line, resentment by resentment, because you need, if required, to use that sick person prayer for anyone who's triggering you before you get to the vital cleansing, starting to look beyond where most of us get to, columns of 5, 6, and especially 7. And on that note, have a happy, sober day.